are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me, as always, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, bud?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. We got a lot to get into on today's show. We got some trades, some soon-to-be trades, some almost trades, some rejected trades, some free agent signings. We got a lot to get into. Before we do that, go to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on this video. Thank you. Okay. I'm not even going to mention the other one because we'll get there. So, as we get into today's show, I think we're going to start with the event that kind of happened first chronologically.
Yeah, you want to go in order is the best way to do this, just to run down pretty much almost exactly where we left off, because we're talking we did a show as quickly as we could, well, not as quickly as we could, but like to publish it as quickly as we could with 3 days to go roughly until the draft, because things were already moving in all sorts of different directions. There was a lot of possibilities, and we needed to get that show out as soon as possible before something happened that where everything we were talking about became complete in the past. And it didn't take long.
No, it did not.
So let's start. I guess we're going to start here because that's where the timeline really hits, and we can go from there. So this trade goes down on Tuesday, I believe, is when it finally went down. So the show came out. We did the show Sunday night-ish.
Yeah.
Got it out quickly.
But yeah, between Sunday morning and Tuesday morning when the deal got done, we really didn't hear a whole lot of change. The only thing that we really heard about was Torrey Krug and Flyers trying to convince him to waive his no-trade clause, him refusing to, which is his right. We're not holding it against him. And then what a deal. As the day kind of wore on and as the weekend kind of wore on, we started to look at what a trade might look like without Torrey Krug, without Travis Sanheim, without a first-round pick, without all these other pieces that we had previously heard about. And then the deal we ended up getting, as it comes down on Tuesday morning, it's Kevin Hayes with half salary retention. The Flyers retain the maximum they are allowed to retain over the remaining 3 years of that contract. There's 3 years left on that, right?
Yep.
And in return, the Flyers receive a 6th-round pick.
Yes. That's the deal.
So, and that's the deal. That's the end of the sentence, the end of the tweet. It's one line for one line. Here we go. Mm-hmm. Kevin, is getting rid of Kevin, not even getting rid of Kevin Hayes, getting rid of half of Kevin Hayes enough? Like, is that valuable enough to ditch for a 6th-round pick? Like, how bad is the relationship with Torts?
It's that bad. Yeah.
Apparently.
I mean, it was, you know what? I went back and I referenced and I wrote a big follow-up on it because I know the initial reaction. The initial reaction was not good. The initial reaction was, then why trade him at all? Then this, that, all this, that, the other thing. I guess the first place to start is what happened to the original deal, what we came on talking about as of Sunday, the idea that there was this big chunk that was going to go. We didn't know the amount of retention. We knew that there were 2 other players in the deal. We knew that there might be a first-round pick involved. All of this, right? So, like, when you're trying to figure all of that out, it's like
it's a complex deal.
Well, it's a complex deal, but your expectations soared. I mean, think about this too, and I said this about Danny Briere. You make the Ivan Provorov trade, and it is what it is, and then this is what's being talked about. So expectations are through the roof. Like, not only is he doing great things with these first 2 trades, if that's exactly what happens, but is he cleaning out everything? Like at the same time that the Hayes thing is going down, DeAngelo's name's out there in a completely different trade, and you're sitting here going, wow, he's really clean, like completely cleaning house of a lot of stuff. Like, he's just going out there and, with DeAngelo, it didn't matter about retention because you were like, it's a 1-year thing. Like, who cares? Just, cool. He's gone,
And for the record, quick editorial note about that. We don't have to do a whole big thing about that. That deal is still going to happen. We were actually mistaken on our last show. It didn't have anything to do with this Kevin Hayes deal. It was actually...
It might have been one time.
Well, sure. But as it comes out, the reason there hasn't been a deal with the Carolina Hurricanes at this point...
Yeah, you're talking about that we were speculating if he was back in play.
Well, right. But I just mean in terms of... we didn't know about the retention thing during our last show. So it came out shortly after our last show. that the reason the deal hadn't been done yet is because essentially the long story short of it is the Flyers traded for Tony DeAngelo last year, signed him to a contract, and are now trading him back to the Carolina Hurricanes within 12 months of the original trade. And that is, by the letter of the law, not allowed, cap circumvention, etc., etc. Now, it's come out that the deal is still going to go through. It's just going to go through 366 days after the original trade. That's essentially it.
Right. Essentially, the deal cannot be completed until July 9th. It still will. Briere didn't say as much. Don Waddell did. Yep. At this moment, now this will put a quick bow on the DeAngelo stuff so we can get done with it. There's still no details. There's still no details on the prospect coming back, which is kind of disappointing because A, the Flyers could be working on a deal to sign this player. I believe this is going to be a rights deal, so it'll be a prospect unsigned. And B, if they were able to a couple weeks ago, roughly, right, like a week ago, I should say, I guess, work out that deal, go into the draft with it. That's a player who, if they had signed him, depending on where, how all this works, could have been able to come to development camp if they want to. I mean, it's
that is true.
There
is a real cost. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying that's a make or break situation. It's just one of those things where it's like that. It's disappointing to not know what could be. That's all.
And for what it's worth, it does sound like management on both sides, Philadelphia and Carolina, did go to the league and had a meeting with them and talked to them about,
just got told no.
Well, right. The argument essentially was, it's a different regime, and Carolina didn't sign the contract, Philadelphia did, so therefore it's not cap circumvention, and it's not, there was no funny business going on, essentially. And they got shut down, and they got told, hey, you can wait a week and a half, and it's going to be fine. And it is going to be fine. Like I said, the deal is going to get done.
Well, and this despite, I'm not trying to jump into too much with everything else, but Carolina wasn't exactly quiet in free agency.
No.
And there was a lot of question at the time about, is that going to affect the trade now? Like, are they going to pull back on this? Like, well, now we can't afford to do this $2.5 million.
Right.
Like, all that. The fact that it came straight from Don Waddell tells me this is going to happen within a week. You're hanging on for it at this point. Just, the story, listen, from my standpoint, the story's been prepped for about a week already. So
and
you just wait for the final details and publish on that thing.
As we talked about a little bit on the last show, the return is expected to be a bit of a lottery ticket type of prospect.
Exactly.
It's certainly not going to be any sort of high level talent. So it might be considered an underwhelming return, and kind of relating back to Kevin Hayes and the fairly underwhelming return there. You might look at this as, maybe a failure of Danny Briere. I don't necessarily look at it that way. I think it's just kind of the cost of undoing some of Chuck Fletcher's bigger mistakes, frankly.
Big part of it, yeah.
Right. So it's, as far as that's concerned, the fact that you got anything for these players, especially because all you're giving up is cap space in the form of, retention over the next couple of years, that you're going to be bad and probably far from the ceiling anyway. Exactly. It's not really a huge deal in the long run. You're getting these lottery ticket assets. If that hits, if that's, if Helge Grans turns out to be a stud, that's a win. And that's the kind of thing that, we're hoping to see out of this
and you're in a position right now where you're willing to take chances. That's the other part. Like,
absolutely.
You got nothing, at the end of the day, think about this for a second. And the answer could be yes and no in the same sentence here. Does Kevin Hayes help the Flyers win more games next year?
Oh,
the answer kind of is yes and no, because the answer is yes, because talent-wise, he's probably better than a lot of what they're going to have. But it's no, because if the relationship is bad and you're bouncing him in different places in the lineup, what are you going to do about that?
So I was going to say, at least twice a year, a piss-poor Kevin Hayes attitude costs you a hockey game.
It can, sure, but I think that the key here is that you're trying to get rid of what doesn't fit the timeline, and we knew this coming into the offseason. We knew this addition by subtraction thing was going to play out in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes the decisions are really hard, like in the case of Ivan Provorov, where the guy is in an age range where could come out on both ends of the spectrum here. Think about this for a second. We're through the bulk of the offseason now as we're sitting here doing this, right? So Ivan Provorov didn't make it, and Travis Konechny did. There's no rhyme or reason between one or the other than that, whether it's, there's reason. I get it. I'm not trying to say there's not, but you know what I mean? I'm saying
and
from
that
an age
could
standpoint,
still change.
right? And from an age standpoint, there's no difference. They have the same amount. They're at the same age, same experience level. One made it through, one didn't.
Yeah.
That's the way that it goes sometimes.
And that could still change. You know,
Sure.
we talked a lot on this last show about Travis Sanheim. And as it sits right now, Danny Briere has essentially pulled him from the trading block. And there was some speculation on a recent 32 Thoughts that might have been done as a way to kind of settle things down a little bit. That basically, once the St. Louis deal fell apart, it was speculated that a lot of people called Danny Briere inquiring about Travis Sanheim.
And you're doing damage control a little bit. You're right.
Right, exactly.
There's a lot of...
If he ends up showing up to your training camp, you don't want him to be miserable.
Sure. And look, to go off of the original deal itself that we were talking about, simply put, things change at certain points. We discussed last show that Torrey Krug was slated to be in the deal. He has the ability to not waive the no move clause if he wants to uphold that. He did. When it happens like that, especially, and it can happen like that, especially when you're in a position like the Flyers are where you're just starting a rebuild. Yep. Without Torrey Krug in that deal, they're not moving Sanheim. No. They're just not. That's why it changes. And so he comes out of the deal. Kevin Hayes is by himself. Hayes by himself isn't worth a first-round pick or anything close, obviously. Right. And this is the thing with the return. I know the return isn't great, especially retaining half the contract and doing so for 3 more years. By itself, it's brutal. But I think with context of the situation that there was no way that this could go on any further. It had to happen. And the only thing I don't like about the deal when all those factors are considered is the 3rd year of retention, the 3rd season, because it does tie up a retention slot for longer than you would want to. But that's the only thing I can't get over. I'm not worried about the half salary thing. It's half the salary. It's better than a buyout of half the salary. You know what I mean? Like you're doing, you buy him out. You're doing this for 6 years, not 3. So
that's fair.
Don't hate that. It's just the retention slot. But you want, like you asked me straight up off the top, was it really this bad? I go back to his quote at the end of the season when he did exit interviews, and this is what Kevin Hayes said to the media. I picked up the message that was sent months ago. I'm okay with it. It's their decision. I don't want to say I'm suited for a contender because I think I'm suited for anyone, to be honest. We'll see how that unfolds. Their decisions have probably already been made. We don't know them yet. I'm sure I'll find out around the draft. Well, guess when this trade happened? 1 day before the draft.
Yep.
There you go. He knew exactly where it was going. Everybody did. And he goes in, he comes into this with, clean slate, new chance with a different team. That's, and I don't want to.
He's going to slot right into that organization.
He is. He is going to slot right in. And you're right. He is going to slot right in. And I don't want this to take away from, despite the differences that he had with Tortorella and all that stuff like that, don't let this take away. He was a good person. He was a really good locker room guy. This isn't about that. But you also had to realize what happens if you prolong the situation that is. Some guy, we've said this since he was hired. Some guys can handle John Tortorella, and some guys just don't fit with the style. And if they don't, they tend to get out quickly because it just creates more problems if you try to make it work for any longer than you have to. That's what happens here. And it's as simple as that. And so, I guess to move further to the Sanheim point that you're talking about, so we can kind of work our way toward the draft portion of this, because you're right. Sanheim's name was out there and on the table and certainly readily available.
Heavily involved. Yeah.
Pretty much up until the draft got started. I mean, there was no reason
and then nobody talked about trades for the entire first round of the draft.
Yeah, there was really no reason to. I mean,
insane. 0 trades. First time since 2006.
The thing that really not interested me, but as I'm going through the way that night played out and things like that, first of all, I understand why nobody wanted to make trades, because if there was something there that you really wanted draft-wise, you were going to make the pick. That was just the way it was. I certainly understand why the Flyers were actively trying to get back into the first round one way or another. And I say that because, look, maybe they sit there and they let the thing play out the way that it ultimately did, and they don't need to make a trade. I think in their minds they thought they were going to have to.
I thought they were going to have to as well.
So we'll get to that in a second with the player that was taken 7th overall ultimately. I think when it came down to it, Danny Briere did exactly what I thought he was going to do, which was hedge his bets with 2 picks as opposed to worry about packaging something and trying to get 1 or whatever. Like, look, good on you for trying to get a 3rd first-round pick. But when it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Keep your 2 picks and be happy with that, because that, you weren't going to come away with you shouldn't have come away with anything less. I really should say that. You shouldn't have come away with anything less.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think Danny Briere showed a lot of patience, because I think a lot of newer GMs, especially, you do the Ivan Provorov thing, and then this Kevin Hayes trade doesn't go quite the way it looked like it was going to go. Mm-hmm. You might feel some pressure to make a big move, make a big splash. And Danny Briere pumped the brakes. And he did make a bit of an aggressive move to kind of jump back into the second round. We can touch on that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But as far as the first round goes, he didn't do anything crazy. Didn't go over the top. Didn't blow any huge prospects out the door.
Sure, and I think that the way that the Hayes trade finished up, and I wrote I guess this would have been because once the deal was done, I wrote this going into draft day. So in the usual slot where I would post a draft preview for round 1, I'm writing a reaction to the Kevin Hayes trade and trying to basically explain Rome wasn't built in a day, and the Flyers won't be either. And that really is a good precursor for where the first pick that they had goes, because it's going to be a patience play. It's going to be you're going to be holding on with this one. You're going to have to wait it out. Yep. But if you can wait out the rewards of what could be, it
looks like it might be worth it.
So let's get into them, because this is the biggest thing we're going to talk about today.
The Philadelphia Flyers, with the 7th overall pick in the 2023 NHL Draft, select Matvei Michkov from St. Petersburg?
Cheska St. Petersburg, yes.
And
that's basically the Russian. Yes. It's Russian hockey club. Yeah,
and not only do the Philadelphia Flyers select Matvei Michkov, but Danny Briere is a magician. He full-blown throws down the smoke bomb. When the smoke clears, he's gone. I'm not going to make a joke about closing the facility, because I know that ended up not being true and it wasn't on the same day. But I'm going to pretend that he closed the facility to have a secret meeting with Matvei Michkov. There's a secret meeting in Philadelphia where they snuck him in without anybody knowing. There's another secret meeting in Nashville where they talked to him again. It becomes very clear to Danny Briere that Matvei Michkov wants to be a Philadelphia Flyer. So, on Tuesday, Danny Briere steps up and very, very nervously selects Matvei Michkov.
Now give him a break. It's the first time he's announced a pick. So I get it.
And it's a huge pick. It is a swing for the fences type of pick.
To be honest, you're calling it nerves. I think it was a little chuckle at, I can't believe what I'm about to do right now.
That too.
To be honest, like everybody thinks that we're not going to do this, and this is exactly what we're going to do. Or nobody knows what we're going to do.
Everybody thinks he's fallen to the team full of Russians behind us who play 3 hours down I-95. No.
So let's.
Matvei Michkov.
Yeah, so let's start with something, because I want to bring up a word that you just used pretty much.
Okay.
That I might not have been the exact word. I think it was close if it wasn't exact. And I want to go to about just shy of 4 o'clock on draft day. The draft starts at 7, by the way, that night. This is the Wednesday night of the first round of the NHL draft, and about 3 hours before the whole thing gets started. Now, obviously, 3 hours from that time point, we know who the first overall pick is going to be.
We've known it for weeks, right?
We've known it since last year.
Let's be real. 2 years, yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
But that happened to be the time that Elliot Friedman tweeted out what he titled Quickie Blog. Read it before everything changes. This was his kind of like 32 thoughts, if you will, but he did a quick draft.
He's retired 32 thoughts. It was 3.2 thoughts.
Well, whatever. You know what I
know.
And the quote within the article was, Philadelphia is the smokescreen queen of this draft. This is 3 hours before, and nobody knows who they're taking because they really like Michkov. No, they really like Ryan Leonard. They like this. They like both. What happens if both are gone? Yep. Do they go Reinbacher? There was stuff all over the place as this was leading up to. So let's get to the actual now. It's past 7 o'clock, right? And Connor Bedard, as expected, goes first. And then the Ducks shake the whole thing up. And they took Leo Carlsson, number 2.
Yeah, they did.
So now everybody goes, oh, it's going to be that kind of first round. We're not going by the script at all, according to what we were told for weeks and weeks. It's going to be different. They go with Carlsson.
Fantilli goes 3.
Now, Fantilli going 3 kind of evens it back out again because now we're back to the same top 3 at least.
We all knew 1, 2, 3, pretty much.
We felt like we did.
In some order, right.
Right. And then San Jose did exactly what everybody thought San Jose was going to do and took Will Smith.
Yep.
So now the top 4 are done.
They got jiggy with it.
So now the top 4 is done, and you're looking 3 picks ahead. You've got 5, 6, and the Flyers are there at 7. You, at that point in time, I even quote tweeted when the Sharks selection came out and said, top 4 when as expected, pretty like in terms of the 4 players taken, not the order.
Right.
Now we're on Michkov Leonard watch because that was the 2 names for me. And I'm not trying to say it was for me in terms of like, oh, that's what I would have wanted.
Those were the big names.
They were the 2 that were most connected. It was the easy, like, it was pretty apparent. Remember how last year when it was getting closer, it was, well, at 5, Cutter Gautier's there and or Juracek. It's Gauthier or Juracek. That's the 2 that we keep hearing about. And Gauthier kept becoming louder and louder and louder. And sure enough, about 48 hours before, not long after we finished the last show, Mishkov's name got louder and louder and louder, and it's like, and there was a good reason for it because by that point they'd already met with him in private,
multiple times, at least once.
At least once by that point, and then there was another meeting once they got to Nashville.
Yep.
Then Montreal not throws a curveball. They didn't really, in the grand scheme of things, but what they did is they guaranteed that one of the 2 guys we've heard all about for several days is going to make it to the Flyers pick. Montreal goes David Reinbacher. Now it means Michkov or Leonard will be there, one of the 2. And Arizona is kind of making a long play here.
They're a complete wild card, honestly. They could have picked absolutely anybody.
Well, they sure picked just about anybody.
They sure picked the wrong Russian.
Well, because they picked a guy who I would have told you was going. As a matter of fact, I think I may have brought him up on last show about going in the 14 to 18 range. Yep. And being a guy you may try to trade up for if you could get that 3rd first-round pick.
Oh, by the way, Arizona also had 12 that they could have just sat and waited and taken him there, but they must have a plan.
Maybe they do. But they took Dmitry Simashev, who, for the record, who I like. I do think he's going to be a really good player. I just don't know if he was number 6.
Second best Russian in the draft.
So, but right away you go, okay, another defenseman off the board. So now they're going to have their pick. They can pick Michkov or Leonard or whatever. And I even tweeted after that, dream scenario for the Flyers here with Michkov, Leonard, and Zach Benson all on the board. You can't go wrong with any of them. But Michkov could be another level. And that is when Danny Briere walked to the podium and said that the Flyers selected...
Said the words that are going to save this franchise. You heard it here first.
Well, no. Do you want me to double down on all this? Because I have a whole big list of notes with this guy. Like, more than any other player we're going to talk about tonight. Because obviously, this is the guy. This is the talent level. This is stepping. You know, we're talking about Danny Briere stepping up to the podium like that. This is Danny Briere stepping up to the plate and swinging for the fences. This is the player that can be the face of your franchise.
Yep. When we talk about what it takes to build a successful team in the current day NHL, we talk about having depth. We talk about having good goaltending. We talk about having good defense. But what puts teams over the top? The reason we saw Vegas go out and get Marc Staal, go out and get Jack Eichel, go out and get Alex Pietrangelo, is because they figured out that you need elite, high-level talent. And the Philadelphia Flyers... Okay. I love Claude Giroux. Claude Giroux was there for 2 or 3 years. But Matvei Michkov projects to be the kind of guy who's going to be there for 10 to 15 years.
The reason you're saying that is exactly where I was about to go with this, is that this is the guy that you step back and say puts up 100 regularly.
Yep.
Seriously.
Especially with where the NHL is going.
Right. Seriously. Look, did Claude Giroux do it once, and did Claude Giroux have another year that was really good that warranted Hart conversation as well? Sure. But you got to go back so much further, and I'm going to get to all the players that I thought of, but I'll start with my initial reaction on Twitter to the pick, which was picking Matvei Michkov was exactly the type of player the Flyers needed. You want high-end talent? You got it. It's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking that could have huge rewards. So when I looked at this pick, I thought of a lot of players when looking at this pick, none by direct comparison, but all of who he represents, who Matvei Michkov represents in this story that we could have, right? I wrote about 3 of them in an article that I put up the next day. And then I want to add an additional player, too, because I thought of it later on that kind of goes with it. The first player I thought of was Eric Lindros. Okay. Back in 1992, when the Flyers made the trade for Lindros, they were in the middle of a playoff dry spell. They needed to start a new era of sorts. And you enter into the picture Eric Lindros, and now there was a young player that fans can get behind. That is what Matvei Michkov can be for this team going forward. I thought, like, right away, one of the first things I thought of was if you go and it's on YouTube, so you can go look for it. Lindros, it's his second career goal, but it's his first goal at home.
Okay.
And he goes in and scores, and the local broadcast has Doc Emmerich doing the local with Gary Dornhofer. And Gary Dornhofer, after the goal is scored, yells out, "That's what the people came to see."
Yep.
And that's what Matvei Michkov can be. It's going to be this is your ticket. You know what I mean? Remember, you know, take a step back for a second and remember everything that we were saying after the lottery was over, all this stuff about, well, you know, now you're doing all this, you're picking the wrong year. You could have had Bedard if you would have, you know, a little bit better of lottery odds, whatever, all that type of stuff. Guess what? You didn't have to do a thing. You earned the 7th pick, you sat there, and you got him.
So, let's talk about why the second most talented player in the draft by a lot of people's metrics.
Sure. Why does he go 7th?
Why does he go 7th? Right.
Well, it's the Russian factor. You got to imagine. I mean, the Russian factor plays into it. It's also the contract. It's the KHL 3-year contract that basically means you're putting this on hold for 3 more years, which actually, in a weird way, brings me to the second player I thought of, because the second player I thought of was Peter Forsberg.
Okay, fair
because
enough.
Peter Forsberg was in the deal for Lindros, obviously, but the Flyers drafted him 6th overall, and he didn't come over and make his NHL debut for another 3 seasons until 1994-95. That's a similar timeline to what you're looking at. So,
by the way, for people that might not know, in the KHL, most European leagues kind of defer to the NHL, and when you get called up to go, they kind of look at it as a promotion and they let you go.
The league that Forsberg was in is a really good example. The Swedish leagues are usually really good about this.
Fantastic. The KHL considers itself an equal to the NHL, and therefore going to the NHL isn't a promotion. You already play for the KHL. What's the problem? Hello?
Pretty much.
So to get out of your contract to go to the NHL, you have to buy it out yourself with your own money. And if your NHL team helps you, they get fined severely. So it's not something that happens particularly often. Michkov did say in his post-draft interview that he does hope to come to North America quite soon. We are talking through a translator here, so there is definitely a little bit of wiggle room there. But it certainly seems as though he has interest in not necessarily playing all 3 of those years with St. Petersburg.
He's going to do whatever he has to do, but it sounds very apparent that the goal
He'd like to get here.
Get to the NHL. He expressed that, and sure.
Yeah.
Let's go to player number 3 then, because but the timeline portion being very relevant to this story, right? That there's a timeline involved that's very relevant. The third player that I thought of was Jaromir Jagr, and the story about during Jagr's draft year that he was telling teams, "I'm not coming over right away. I'm not coming right away." You know, all that stuff like that. And then he told the Penguins, "You draft me, I'll be there tomorrow."
Part of me wonders if Matvei Michkov did that and if he'll be in camp this fall. Now, I'm not putting money on it.
Right, and I'm not going so far as to say Michkov did that specifically, like told the Flyers.
If he shows up in camp, though, I'll put some stock into it.
But I don't think let's just wait. This part's genuine. He made it clear he wants to be a Flyer.
Absolutely.
And may have helped influence that decision in terms of that the Flyers were willing to take him in the meeting.
The factors that were important to him is he wanted to be in a market that cared about hockey. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be in a market that's willing to win, that has a clear direction. And it's nice to see, and has a path to, long-term success.
Now,
whatever him and Danny Briere talked about, Danny sold him on it.
Sure. Now, to be fair, okay, so the Flyers obviously got him at 7, so 6 teams passed on him.
Yep.
Chicago, we know why, because Chicago was picking the guy who's going to play next year and was right there ready to be taken.
And is going to be a superstar. Yeah.
Sure. Now, I have some clarity. I feel like we have some clarity on Columbus with Fantilli because Fantilli is signed, so he'll probably play next.
And he wanted to be there. You saw the video that came out from May, where he said, the team I'd really like to play for is the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Well, I'm going to tell you why. First of all, proximity to being a Michigan.
He's a Michigan kid.
You're going to go to a team that
right down the road
is close enough that you know what's going on. But I got to imagine that has to do with, with Johnny Gaudreau and Patrick Laine and these skill guys that they have. That it's like, can you imagine putting him with it?
They're putting some things together in Columbus.
That's going to be. That's going to be a team to watch this year. I'm not going to go so far as to say playoff team or that they're going to be that much improved because you still have to look at the overall body of work. But nonetheless,
obviously we have a lot of offseason left and we have plenty of time before our season previews. But the division's pretty wide open this year.
Sure.
There might be some pretty heavy shifting going around in the Metro, and who's to say Columbus doesn't slide towards the top and head up towards at least
in the playoff spot. Yeah. Now in terms of so Columbus we knew was in that regard was closer, which is why I kind of figured they also would lean Carlson if it came down to it. Like if Fantilli went to the Ducks, which again I think the Ducks are thinking we've picked so high so often, it's got to at some point in time, it's got to start to work its way towards improvement, right? Like you have that many good players, like good young players. Eventually, they should all kind of grow at the same time and turn into something. But Columbus was right there too in that same kind of vein because Columbus has picked it high a lot. You're thinking the Kent Johnsons, and not to mention the fact that Kent Johnson wasn't even the leading rookie scorer last year that they had on the team. Kirill Marchenko, anybody, but again, it's a whole, and they were so battered by injury too, that it's going to be that's a solid roster coming back.
Absolutely.
So I think it starts to get interesting once you got to San Jose. But then again, I look and I go, San Jose and Arizona aren't going to qualify for what Michkov's talking about.
They're just kind of picking BPA, and he's not going to want to come play for either of them.
But if he's talking about strong hockey market and history and all that stuff like that, then neither what's left between the top 3 and what was there? What's left was Montreal, which certainly has the market for history, and Philadelphia. And I'm sure he qualified Washington in that as well, obviously. But but there's a pecking order, in the draft itself. And
and as you kind of alluded to earlier, by keeping it a little bit under wraps that he was interested in coming to Philly,
right?
You disincentivize Washington from trading up, because that was kind of the story on the day or so leading up to the draft. Is Washington going to get trigger happy and jump up to 5 to Montreal and take Michkov there to prevent or to not risk him sliding by Philly? That was a talk. Obviously, who knows what Phoenix or what Arizona's up to. Washington could slide up there as well. That was really the only thing I saw people speculating about was, do the Washington Capitals and the Philadelphia Flyers get in a bidding war to try to move up?
Sure, and the funny thing is last show I said don't do that. Don't get into a situation where I think you're going to want the 2 first-round picks, so don't get into this crazy war over back and forth of who gets the higher pick, who trades with Montreal. Don't do this, and
they didn't need to,
and they ultimately didn't need to. So those are the 3 players I mentioned in the article that I compared to, the situations, and then I thought of a 4th one that's a lot more relative and a lot more, more recent for recency bias as well. Because the 4th player I thought of happens to be another Russian player. The 4th player I thought of was Artemi Panarin. And again, this is not necessarily a style comparison. It's strictly a note of irony, which is the Flyers just had this big press conference in May and announced the new era of orange and stated their completely aligned goal of a rebuild done the right way. And that made me think in this moment of the New York Rangers and the letter. And not too long after that letter, the Rangers had Adam Fox demanding a trade to get sent to the New York Rangers. And
still annoys me, but
because that's where he wanted to play. And Artemi Panarin signed there because that's where he wanted to play. And suddenly the Rangers rebuild that didn't really have much of a timeline going forward, had a little more of a timeline, and it wasn't going to be as long, right?
Yep, got a kick in the teeth pretty quick.
I think that the pick of Matvei Michkov and the contract length, whether you go, love Danny Briere's answer to this, by the way. It's a 3-year contract, and we assume it's 3 years. Right answer. It's 3 years away, right?
In public, that's absolutely the correct answer.
Well, sure, but make that exactly the way you think, because I think it put a 3-year timeline on the rebuild.
And that's fine. Spend 3 years stockpiling assets and come out in 3 years ready to party.
Because in 3 years' time, if Michkov is on this roster, exactly when everybody thinks he will be, you can't help but wonder what else is going to be on the roster.
Oh, yeah.
And don't think for a second that if you get to free agency the year before, one season before he comes over, if it lines up,
start making moves.
I think you've got leverage again in terms of, listen, we're 1 year away from this. We feel confident he's coming over after this season, but you're a free agent now, so we've got to do this now.
Right.
We're going to sign you, and we want to sign you for 5-6 years and start building what we think is going to be a cup contender.
Right, and theoretically, 3-4 years from now, we're talking about a cap ceiling that's going up, $10 to $15 million maybe. So, things could get wild.
But what I'm getting at is that's what this kid represents.
Absolutely. I'm saying the Flyers are going to be in a great spot to take advantage of all that.
He represents the full revival of this in terms of putting somebody to it that actually qualifies as one of these types of players that good, There's
something a little poetic to him being the first one to pull the jersey on live TV. The promo video was fine, but we got to see the new jersey for the first time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's kind of nice, man. There's something symbolic to that.
Yeah, I think it's just as simple as that. This is the guy who's going to lead you into the next era, and it's not going to happen overnight. But as long as you seriously, as long as you can keep talking from a standpoint of this is where it starts. He's still the starting point, and he's still the focal point of the whole rebuild from here on out. And that's why I say, I think that's why he puts a timeline on it, because now you look at everybody moving forward in that realm of possibilities. And it doesn't mean, obviously it doesn't mean the ones who come after him are going to jump in earlier per se, but imagine the timeline with a Cutter Gauthier type. You took Gauthier last year at 5th. Now you get Michkov at 7. Are these not the two guys that I think, in 5 years, 10 years, in 5 years, for the 5 years that follow that people are going to talk about?
I was about to say, so if Michkov comes over in 3 years and we talk about them kind of loading up and getting in position, Travis Sanheim will have 5 years left on his deal. The one that just started.
Right.
So
after 3 more, yes.
Well, right. So we talk about him potentially being a guy who comes out on the other side. And it'll be interesting to see who does end up on that roster. Having a bit of a 3-year timeline does allow you to go a little bit more bare bones than maybe they would have otherwise. If you kind of have a plan for coming out of it.
Sure. There's something poetic to the 3-year thing right now too, because it wasn't, and I tried to go back and find which episode it was that we did this conversation. But we had a conversation not long before the end of Chuck Fletcher or not long after, one of the two, where we looked at the roster and said, I think I just asked you because I had already looked it up and all that stuff. How many contracts does this team have that have a cap hit greater than $5 million on it or something like that? Right. And we came up with, I think it was 10.
Okay.
And Pittsburgh also had 10, which is 2 teams in totally different places. Right.
A little bit, yeah.
I went in and I did a little bit of a different exercise, so to speak, because as you continue to wind things down and go into things like that, I'm going to ask you a different question. And I know you have Cap Friendly kind of relatively handy tonight, so I'm going to tell you to not look at Cap Friendly for this.
Okay. Not looking at Cap Friendly. Okay.
How many contracts do the Flyers currently have that are longer than 3 years remaining?
Ooh. Okay. Nick Delorier.
Longer.
Oh, okay. He has
Delorier has 3 years exactly left. So I'm going to
Ristolainen has 4.
Okay.
Sanheim is just kicking in. He's got a bunch left. Konechny's at 2 left, right?
Correct. So Konechny is not qualified.
Right. Did they sign Atkinson to a deal? Are you counting that? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Atkinson's got 2 years left as well.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Is it just the 2? Okay.
That's going to be a real intriguing conversation about him over the next couple of years, too, because that's movable.
Yep.
Oh, it is. I'm just being real.
Oh, I know, especially with that cap flexibility coming up like we're all talking about.
You got a few more that you could go to. It's not like you were done here. It's not that trick of a question that it was Sanheim, Ristolainen, and you're done. It's not that trick.
Oh, okay.
Like it wasn't that simple.
Okay, who else is there?
So I'm surprised you didn't get one of them because you love this guy. Joel Farabee has 5 left on his contract.
I forgot his deal just got going, right?
So he's got 5 left. And then you got 2 more that are probably out of sight, out of mind, but I'll give them to you anyway.
Oh, they don't count.
No, hold on. One of them does. Sean Couturier.
Oh, it's fair.
Sean Couturier has 7 left.
He's getting dangerously close to not counting, by the way.
Well, we'll see about that. And then you're right about the other one. It's Ryan Ellis.
Yeah, it does not exist.
But bottom line, they have 5 total contracts that last more than the next 3 years. And out of the 5, by the time you get to that 4th year, so 3 years go by,
those deals get movable.
Well, so let's get to the point where we assume Michkov's going to be able to play 3 years down the line. 3 seasons come and go, and now we're on to season 4. That means
he's coming in.
That means Ristolainen has 1 year left on his contract. That means that Farabee has 2 left on his contract. That means that now Sanheim's is going to be long and Couturier's is going to be long. Even Ryan Ellis has 2 full years left at that point. I'm sorry. Ellis has 1 at that point.
Okay, I was going to say there's no shot a single dollar of Ryan Ellis counts against the cap at that point.
What's realistically going to happen is that Ellis is going to be an LTIR move at the start of the year for the next couple of years until they get down to maybe 2 left and somebody says, "Now we'll take it."
Yeah, Arizona. Or whoever the Arizona is in,
or wherever they are at that point. You mean?
The Houston team.
The Houston team. No. So, but I want. So, if those are the 5 names that will still be under contract 3 years from now, here's a couple of players who won't be, according to this. Okay, because in 3 years' time, you're down, or not down, but 3 years' time, you have the next decision to be made on Scott Lawton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Delorier's contract is up too, like you said. There's not another defenseman on the roster that has more than a year.
Presumably you're going to be signing Cam York to a contract at some point.
Well, Cam York's an RFA this year, so
right.
I don't know. And again, I don't know if he's getting much more than what everybody else gets, which is 1 to 2 years right now.
Sure. Because no player is signing 3, 4, 5 year deals unless they're getting paid right now, and
probably, and nobody's been able to pay. So,
right.
But everybody's gone. So that's what I'm saying. These are the only 5 players that are left, and one of them is not going to really play. We know that.
Right.
And then you've got 2 others that. Well, yeah, I'll go 2 others because I'll count this as 2. Because Sanheim and Ristolainen, we kind of know they are what they are, and they're going to continue to play, and that's fine.
Yeah, they're fine. Yeah.
Joel Farabee is trying to work back from an injury that we've seen Jack Eichel work back from. So I don't want to put anything on him over the next 3 years. Maybe he turns out he could turn out to be a huge value play at $5 million a year.
Yeah, and he looked way better over the last 2 months of the season than he did over the first 4.
He's the type of guy I can't wait to talk to in training camp to see how he's feeling. Because, that's...
If he's 100%, that's huge for your team.
Exactly. And then Couturier is the real big question mark at forward because the guy's basically missed 2 years' time also.
Yeah. That's the first test to kind of the new regime on that.
But this is what I'm saying. By that point, 3 years down the line, how many of these guys are we talking about the same way? You know what I mean?
Well, and we'll have answers, right? Like, if Sean Couturier still hasn't played by then, we'll know what the deal is.
But you're also right about the fact that you go into, well, in Couturier's case, sure, but you're also going to go into that year with Ristolainen's 1 year being potentially very movable.
Yep, especially if the cap is 95 or 92 or whatever it's at in 3 or 4 years.
I hope it's more than 92 at that
point. Well, but that's what I'm saying.
That'd be less than $10 million from now, which is not good. But yes, I get your point. Do we want to move on from, and look, I know we could sit here and talk about Matvei Michkov all day long, all week long, all off season long. We probably will still talk about, well, if nothing else, okay, let's put it this way. If nothing else, and this is going to be a good segue to the next first round pick that we want to talk about, because obviously, even if Mishkov's not playing for the Phantoms or playing for any, team in North America, you can still track what's going on in the KHL. And believe it or not, on occasion, there's sometimes networks on certain cable companies that will actually give you viewings of these things. So I may have to take a look and see if Cheska St. Petersburg is on TV at any point to maybe watch this kid. But beside the point, there's a way to track and see how he's doing. And I think people are now going to be excited to track and see how a prospect is doing. I think for a little while that kind of became a little, bothersome's not the word, but you know what I mean? Like it kind of felt fruitless to go and look and be like, oh, that's all, like it wasn't a great farm system over the last couple of years, especially as the few that kind of have made it through graduated. It was kind of left for what it was.
Absolutely.
So as we get to the second pick of the first round, who plays for a team in Canadian juniors, who plays for the London Knights, who we're going to mention again when we get to the rest of the draft picks. So maybe if you want to be viewing that team as well, you might want to, because then you can watch two more prospects that just got selected. So let's start with the one that went in the first round. That would be a great name in this draft, just a great name, Oliver Bonk.
Oh yeah, and if you remember Radek Bonk, this is his son. Like you said, coming out of the London Knights, he is a defenseman. He is right-handed. We have a 6'2" right-handed defenseman on our hands, folks. It's probably not a bad draft pick. He had 40 points in 67 games with the London Knights, which is solid for juniors. It's nothing crazy, but he plays a good two-way game, and London is one of those teams. So Canadian juniors is pretty top-heavy. It has kind of an English soccer vibe to it.
That's a good way to look at it.
And the London Knights are Manchester United.
They can be, yeah. I mean,
a lot of times, right? A lot of the years that town loves their London Knights, and they take it very, very seriously.
I mean, if anybody saw, based on what the Toronto Maple Leafs did in free agency and how all of a sudden there were pictures of an old London Knights line floating around, then it kind of goes to show you how much they value.
They're one of those teams.
So,
yeah.
Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this pick, because I know that
I love it.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it then. I mean, it's a more conservative pick. I mean, look, Danny Briere got up there and swung for the fences with Michkov, and there's no doubt about that. So you have to make sure that bottom line you come out of this with something. Like,
sure.
There was obvious risks to the Michkov pick, and there's going to be until he's here. There's just no way around it.
For sure.
And I don't know if I touched on this on the last show or not, but the Ivan Fedotov thing also really probably played into that a lot from a Flyers perspective.
Right. I was going to say, we're not just talking about hockey risk. We're talking about geopolitical risk.
As far as I'm concerned, hockey risk, what risk was there?
Well, none.
The kid is insanely talented. He's an offensive dynamo. It's going to translate to the next level.
Okay. But Oliver Bonk.
Yes, Oliver Bonk. So, but that's the point. You're still taking a swing, even despite all of the things that are surefire about Michkov. There's still a risk involved, and this is the opposite. You're going into the Canadian junior ranks, so getting him to play is not going to be a problem. They just they graduate their players at 20 and they go pro anyway. So you're just looking at a handful of years before he's probably. I think the progression's going to stand. He'll probably be a Phantom for a year. He's a defenseman, so it's going to take some time.
If Oliver Bonk follows the career trajectory of Travis Sanheim, are you upset about that?
No, at this given moment, no, obviously not.
Because hopefully they would develop him better than they had developed Travis Sanheim for a little bit there. I think but if that's the case, he could end up being a really, really solid player.
Now, I think Sanheim had higher expectations, potentially. So make of that what you will. Look, obviously, when you have a player like Gabe Perreault still on the board at that given moment, a 50-goal score at any level is more flashy. It's more flashy than defense.
I had interest in Perreault,
and I wouldn't have disagreed if that was the pick. But it's relatively predictable in the sense that Keith Jones said you build from the back end, that they look defense. And I don't know that Oliver Bonk is going to be a star or even a top-pairing defenseman. It takes a lot of talent, a lot of work to be that.
Yeah.
But I do think he's got the foundation of an NHL career already laid. I think he's solid enough defensively that if he can discover some offensive chops that further equate to the NHL level, like the 40 points in Canadian juniors is great. But I don't know how much that translates. Like guess what? Travis Sanheim was doing that too.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
and I did also want to mention that that was his first full season in the OHL. It looks like he had
Fair.
gotten called up the year prior and was point per game in a lower league.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very, very, very likely that he goes back to London this year and
Yes.
and possibly even next year as well if he's eligible. This is another guy that he's probably not going to be a contributor on your team until we're looking in that 3-year Matvei Michkov window.
Bingo. Like I even have here, I wrote down if he can develop those offensive chops to further equate to the NHL level, he makes it in a big way if he can do all of that, right? Like that's what people look for in defensemen today. That said, he's another timeline play. Like I'm not like you shouldn't be worried about hearing anything from this kid other than junior hockey success for the next couple of years.
Yep, just go dominate 15-year-olds and juniors. Just go have fun.
Exactly.
That's all we want.
That's all that you should. That's all you could ask for, and I think it's perfect. So and I wrote about it the next day as well, and called it an upside play. Which it is. You're going off the fact that the kid is very foundationally sound in what he's trying to accomplish defensively, can make an impact offensively at that level, and then if you can get him to another level in development, which. This is going to sound like a broken record. I talked about it previous shows, but I'm going to definitely mention it here since we're doing draft-centric things. Development is the biggest thing here. Now that you've got who you've got, it's about developing. And the overhauling that was done to the development team, and which is already on full display already because I haven't been able to make it over to development camp, wasn't able to make it out this week, but at development camp, you got Patrick Sharp and John LeClaire on the ice with these guys now, not, what it used to be. There's changes there.
Yep.
And this is where it's going. So you got to hope that this is, that they take the steps necessary and really hit that upside because these are upside plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mentioned Vegas a little bit earlier in the show, and they have kind of built their team legacy on taking calculated risks and, quite frankly, sometimes doubling down and possible shenaniganery, cough, Marc Staal, whatever. But yeah, it's interesting to see as Danny Briere gets a little more comfortable in the role, as he kind of starts getting some stuff done, what risks he will or won't be willing to take. And it seems like he's willing to take them so far.
And I think that Danny Briere went in with a clear vision of this is not about immediacy at all. Like, if rebuilding it the right way means it's going to take some time, and that's why I like a lot of what he did. We're going to get into day 2 now in just a second. This was just the first round, obviously, but day 2 featured a similar theme. It was all about upside, and it was all about what could be down the line, and being prepared for situations down the line too, which I think matters as well. You want to be as prepared as possible for unlikely scenarios to happen where you're not as equipped at a specific position or at, whatever. You want to be ready to go in all areas. And I love the idea of being patient with some of this stuff.
Sure.
You're going to have to.
Yeah, and with the first 2 picks on day 2, Danny Briere did show a weird mix of both patience and aggression. By trading up for a guy you're going to have to be patient for, but whatever, it's fine. The Philadelphia Flyers traded the 167th overall pick plus a 2024 second to the Chicago Blackhawks. Obviously, that is probably going to be a bit of a higher second next year if the team is bad, but you're paying a price to get back up towards the second round.
Well, not necessarily, because that 2024 second was LA's.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, then fair enough. Then that'll probably be a mid to late second, and that is an even better value. And the Philadelphia Flyers used that 51st pick to select Carson Bjarnason.
Yes.
Which is going to be a tongue twister forever.
Yeah,
Lou Nolan's going to hate it.
Lou Nolan doesn't have to say the goalie's name more than once a game, though, usually.
That's fair.
I mean, unless he's a star of the game on a regular basis, then you're mentioning him twice a game, maybe, starting lineup.
Or unless he gets some penalties.
I don't know if Carson Bjarnason is that kind of goaltender, but
hey, any goaltender can be that kind of goaltender. They're all a little nutty.
So let's discuss this one for a second here, because so Bjarnason kind of came at a time, like his selection came at a time when there was a bit of a run on goalies. You started to see it kind of I'll actually call it relatively early second round because I believe we were sitting. It was like 37 to 39 range when some of them started coming off the board.
Yeah.
No goalie was taken in the first round, obviously. So you get to the second round, and now there's a bit of a run on goalies, and the Flyers go up and they get to 51 like that, and they get to 51 and are able to take a goalie that was, according to NHL Central Scouting, the top-ranked North American goalie prospect in the draft, which is pretty substantial. I mean, it means that you're going to go through, you're going to go through a process with him because he's a goalie. Like when you draft a goalie who's 18 years old, and in juniors and things like that, you don't expect to hear from these guys for probably another 4 to 5 years minimum, at least, like really making noise. But he's a potential high ceiling guy. He's a raw talent, so he's going to need some work. And there's a lot of belief that he's going to be a big focal point for the Brandon Wheat Kings in the WHL this year. There's a lot of belief that maybe if he gets enough starts and the play is good enough, there could be World Junior talk in his future. So that's all stuff that, like, there's a part of me that sits there and is ready to tell people kind of get ready for this, because remember kind of 5-ish years ago, maybe a little more than that, when everything was watching World Juniors and how many kids they have representing them over, and all stuff like that. I think you're going to start to get back to that pretty soon, potentially. I mean, they really kind of went all over the map with some of this stuff, and there's every reason to believe that they, will have a lot of prospects playing in those types of tournaments going forward.
Yeah, and the Flyers have kind of sneakily put together a little bit of a decent goaltending pipeline. Like when you think about Sam Ersson, who got a little bit of play at the NHL level, Ivan Fedotov, who we touched on him a little bit earlier. There are some guys in the organization. Sandstrom's still floating around. You have some flexibility here, and goalies are weird and they're unpredictable, and you never know when someone's going to stop knowing how to play hockey. So it is good to have some backup options, right? And then every once in a while you see a Vegas situation where they just blow through 6 goalies in a season.
Right, and then by the way, I do want to mention the one goalie that you left out of that equation that was already in the system before the draft, because Alexei Kolosov is another.
Yes.
Keep him in mind here. Because,
that is fair.
Because there's a lot of belief that he could be one of these guys that ends up making it over here too. So,
and then somebody who may or may not make an impact a little bit further down, is going to be the 3rd round selection. The Flyers had 2 third round selections. This is the first. It's another goalie. It's Igor Zevragin, probably pronouncing that wrong. But it's the draft. That's how this works. And again, a little bit of a more depth pick option. The 12th ranked European goalie by NHL Central Scouting. Just another kind of body in the pipeline. Now, we've talked over recent shows about the Carter Hart thing and if he is or is not going to be around in the short term and the long term, honestly.
Right. And people, by the way, right after this pick was made, freaked out about that possibility.
Of course. Because taking the first goalie, we kind of expect that at some point just to get a
right.
little
I think
more
the only
depth
thing
in
that was surprising, was that on day 2, that was the lead-in.
That you traded up to get a goalie and then took a goalie with the next pick also. It definitely sends a message that you're prioritizing some goaltending depth.
Now, I know that everybody immediately equated it to Carter Hart. Personally, I wonder, I've already had questions about Felix Sandstrom's future. So that's one to keep an eye on also. Like this is why you built the pipeline up, because eventually you need guys who step in and try to make noise to get to that level, right? We know they love Sam Ersson. We kind of know the situation with Carter Hart, which is a little bit all over the place at this point, to be honest, because the situation with Carter Hart is that he is firmly in Philadelphia as long as the investigation is ongoing. Right. But it's not like it's been a secret that if somebody came along with the right offer that they wouldn't be willing to move him. Yes. That's why I'm saying the situation's all over the place. I don't know.
And it's mostly a matter of, is anybody making that call at the moment? And it certainly doesn't seem that way. And seriously, depending on the day you ask me, my answer might be different. Like that he's the future of the franchise in goal. He's probably on the move. No, he's never going to be on the move. It changes every day, because that's how many different scenarios are kind of up in the air with him. But for now, he's a Philadelphia Flyer and will continue to be, and that's really all that matters. And to be honest, whenever this
if the report comes out and the investigation kind of has a
Resolves
finishing
itself.
point and a resolution, even by the end of the month, I don't think it changes anything going into next season. I think it just it'll either completely shut down or further fuel the talk as we go further.
And it's one of those things that if, that report does come out and he is cleared, obviously, because we kind of have to assume the best here because the worst is awful.
You want to. I know that.
Well, right, because the worst is awful. Assuming the best here, assuming he is cleared, Carter Hart is young enough that he could be a guy who comes out on the other end of that 3-year window we keep talking about. But he is also at the point now where he's probably got the most value he's ever going to have. Because over the next 2 years, he's probably going to get John Gibson. And at some point, he might draw a line in the sand like John Gibson allegedly has. But he might also just kind of wear down. And then by the time the team is good behind him, he's just kind of worn down. So it might not be the worst idea to ship him off now while he has as much value as he can and rely on that goaltending depth, rely on the Ersson and, all these guys in the pipeline to fill the gap.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of which direction we go. And I think you're right that it is all kind of hinging on this investigation. But if the investigation again clears him, I expect Danny Briere to at least talk to him about an extension. Does he want to stay in Philadelphia?
And I do think that a couple things have changed in the last few weeks. Not to try to completely shift gears from draft to some of the other stuff, but it's a good way to put kind of a bow on some of the trade talk stuff because once the Sanheim thing fell through and he wasn't included, and now they're kind of like, yeah, he's going to be around. He's off the table. You kind of noticed how the talk about Scott Lawton went down and the talk about Travis Konechny went down, and Carter Hart was already untradeable at this moment because of the investigation. But again, if you're going off of age, if a 26-year-old forward still works to fit the timeline right now, while you see where it goes, I think a 24-year-old goalie kind of also gets the leeway of that as well.
Absolutely. And I feel like Danny Briere was ready to make some big fat swings, some big old changes, some big deals to get you that sort of high-end talent. That
has it been mentioned on here yet? Has it been mentioned on here? And Elliot Friedman was the one who got this out there. Has it been mentioned what the nickname around the league is for Danny Briere?
No.
Big Brass One's Danny?
We love that.
Or Big Brass One's Briere, I think is what I've heard. Like,
listen,
seriously.
We love that out of Danny B.
Like, I'm just saying, like people have noted his aggressiveness so far in what he's trying to do. Like you gave him seriously, he was left with a big mess and is trying to clean up as much as humanly possible in one offseason. It's rather impressive, to be honest.
He's doing a fantastic job. A lot of GMs would take a little bit more of a wait-and-see approach, and Danny Briere is being hands-on and just getting after it. And speaking of getting after it, the next pick...
You're going to have some fun with the names from here on out.
Well, this one's easy.
No. I mean, just in terms of good hockey names.
Oh, yeah.
Falls right in line. And he's teammates with them.
Second pick of the third round. Hey, Kevin, do you think Danny Briere watched some London Knights games this year?
Probably a few.
With the 95th selection, the Philadelphia Flyers drafted Denver Barkey, almost a point per game at the AHL level. At the OHL level. Yes. Which, I mean, in the third round, the fact that you're getting a guy who in his draft year was 59 points in 61 games, on a loaded team, playing a little bit further down the lineup. He's not one of their superstars, just a solid contributor to, again, quite a good team. I think Denver Barkey is going to be a solid little piece.
You think that Danny Briere was watching a lot of London Knights games. I think Danny Briere looked at Denver Barkey and thought he was looking in a mirror.
That's true. That is true.
I mean,
is the kind of game he plays.
The guy's 5'8" and plays tough, tenacious, battles on the forecheck, and...
Hey there, Barkey!
And he's high energy, and oh, by the way, 22 goals and 59 points in 61 games is pretty darn good. Also,
pretty productive.
Like you said, also for a guy who's not necessarily at the top of the lineup,
right?
All the time. So it probably only is going to get better for him. He's got some really good. Obviously, he's got some good offensive skills. I think he's, from what I've seen, he's also a strong passer. He can set up guys really well. And I think, again, this was a lot of an upside play. And not to mention the fact that, so again, London Knights here. So you're going to be paying a lot of attention to the London Knights going forward, because now there's two guys that we're talking about, both picked relatively high, by the way. I mean, you're talking about your second first-round pick and now a third-round pick that went to two players who play for this team. You got to imagine that, there's a lot, and not only is there a lot of upside, but there's hope that both of them can pan out. I mean,
absolutely. Again, and the London Knights have produced as many NHLers as any OHL team. Like, they are one of the dominant powerhouse franchises up in the CHL. Like, when you think CHL, you think London Knights.
Yeah.
Fourth round pick. Speaking of picking guys with familiar things in common here.
Yeah.
For the first time since 2013, the Philadelphia Flyers have a Knuble in the organization. 103rd overall, Cole Knuble, Mike Knuble's son. Kevin, I am 1,000 years old. Help me out here.
I can't help you, because I felt old when it was Radek Bonk's son who was being selected by the Flyers, let alone Mike Knuble's son, who most of the organization can sit there and say, like, oh yeah, he was running around the locker room as a kid. Like, which of course it's believable. I'm not saying it's not at all. It's just one of those things where you're like, yeah, by the way, this kid now,
he probably knows his way around the facility.
Sure. Well, Danny Briere spoke about that, because he's not alone. I mean, you're talking about Cole Knuble, Oliver Bonk, and there's many more like otherwise who have gone, beyond just those handful here that have history, that had their father play or something like that, and it's that this element of familiarity of being around a professional team can help you adjust to, like, not being so starstruck when you walk into a locker room.
Yes.
Which is probably true. Now, I want to bring up,
a little bit about how the game works.
Sure. Now, I do want to bring up, because Cole Knuble's kind of an interesting case here, because he's an overage prospect, so he was eligible last year and was not drafted. So he went back in as a re-entry. Got to give him credit, because he put in a lot of work over the last year to have a really strong, I mean, he was leadership role for Fargo in the USHL, 30 goals, 66 points in 57 games. That just, shows the willingness to work. Now, he also was, a lot of the questions were about his skating, and from what I'm to understand, from seeing a few tweets from some of the other guys who are covering development camp and things like that, his skating looks maybe a lot better now than it was a while ago. So if he's put in the work there, and you can get that foundational skill really into a good spot, he can be a player who you watch for a while. I mean, you got to keep an eye on him, and he's off to play college hockey now. So, like, this all works out from where the way I see it, because again, it's a time play, it's a timeline play.
Right, we're talking about stock in the cupboard long term, right? It's a fourth round pick. Mm-hmm. If he makes an impact on your roster one day, that is fantastic.
And Cole Knuble's got the physical tools, like kind of the way that Mike Knuble did, to be honest. Well, no, but the physical tools and some, mixed with the offensive prowess, high motor, can bring energy. Now, the difference between Cole and Mike Knuble in this case would be, at one point in time, Mike Knuble was playing alongside Peter Forsberg and Simone Gagne and getting top line minutes.
True.
I don't know if that's Cole Knuble's ceiling. I think he's an ideal third or fourth line guy.
It's also a very different NHL than it was when Mike Knuble was doing that.
Well, that's correct. I think Cole Knuble's probably an ideal third line type of guy at his peak here, or maybe fourth, honestly. But it's still an upside play to work on, and maybe up until when he was playing with guys like Forsberg and Gagne and keeping up, I don't know that Mike Knuble was viewed all like that much, like that he wasn't viewed more like the middle guy. And
it might be a family with a little bit of a chip on their shoulders, and when you give them a chance, they'll embrace it. So, all right, let's keep moving here. I will be honest, we are getting towards the deeper stages of the draft. These are the prospects I'm a little bit less familiar with, so I might be kind of skimming over these just a touch.
We'll keep it relatively quick for most.
These are all long-term projects, late-round picks that, again, we don't expect to see for 3, 4, 5 years at minimum.
Okay, now do you got this name, or do you need me to jump in, because I do actually know how to say it?
I assume it's Ciernik.
Nope, I got you then.
Is it Ciernik?
Alex Ciernik.
Ciernik. It's the K sound. Yes. Of course. Alex Ciernik, coming out of Sweden, 122nd overall pick. Yeah. Left winger. Just kind of, again, looking at organizational depth. A guy who, let's be honest, we're all looking at phantoms here for the most part, unless somebody breaks out.
Well, so I want to pump the brakes on what you're saying here
for the most part. For the most part,
like I understand that again, upside play. I mean, this is a swing in the 4th round. You're hoping you can kind of uncover a gem. You know, the one thing I'll say about him, based on some of the stuff I've been reading about his game, things like that, is he's explosive as a skater. So he's got the skating. He's got the skating down.
Okay.
He's got skill that can make him a potential hit, but there's work to be done elsewhere. But still, you got a guy who I think a lot of people saw as a big upside play. A lot of people who maybe had him going a little earlier than he did, which is always a good thing. You know, I mean, if you're picking a guy in the 120s,
if a guy's sliding to you, yeah,
right. Especially by the time you get to 4th round, it's like, listen, if you're taking a guy who still is a prototypical middle round pick, but also, you know, you're still sitting there saying, okay, 4th round, go ahead, take a swing. You know, could have gone
Absolutely.
3rd probably. So, yeah. But he's actually one of my 3 to watch here. I'm throwing him in with Denver Barkey in this one, and then the next prospect we're going to talk about, because all 3 kind of got higher ratings from what I saw than where they were actually picked.
Okay.
So they're kind of sleepers in this draft potentially. So you got to keep they're just going to be guys to keep an eye on. Let's just leave it at that. So do you want to go to that 135th overall and talk about
Carter Southern out of the Portland Winterhawks? Is another right-handed defenseman, 23 points, 68 games. Again, that was his first year with the Portland Winterhawks. So, what do you got to say about him? Absolutely.
So definitely another potential sleeper here, high upside player. From what I understand, among the best transition players in the draft. So he can go and kind of be patient in his own zone, use his skill to break out, can move the puck quickly. So you've got a good foundation here at both ends. It's balanced. He just needs to see that just grow even bigger to kind of get to the level. It's going to be a guy who, if he makes it, he's going to be worth the wait. And I do want to throw in something that I didn't write down in the notes because I didn't see it, or not notes in my article. I mean, because I wrote this article like the night of the draft when all the picks were made. I didn't see this until a few days later. He tweeted a picture of himself meeting Scott Hartnell wearing a Flyers t-shirt.
That's
back
awesome.
when he was probably 11 years old. It looked like 10, 11 years old.
That's
so
awesome.
literally goes dream come true. Like, and there he is. Like, that's the stuff that you love to see. You
Absolutely. And we go from that to a guy who played for a team called the Flyers.
Yeah.
The next pick, 6th round, 172nd overall from the Leamington Flyers of the same Junior B League that Oliver Bonk came out of a year ago. Ryan McPherson, he's a center. Anything on him, or is this kind of a Junior B guy again that you're taking a little bit of a long shot on?
You're doing the long play here. I like the path that he's kind of set to be on, because he's going to play in the BCHL next season, and then the sights are set on the NCAA, and he's going to, I believe he's committed to go to the University of New Hampshire. So that's, you're getting into a good program, and the numbers were good for his age level and all that type of stuff like that. He actually has a twin brother who was also draft eligible, didn't go drafted, ended up at development camp with the Flyers also as a camp invite. So there you go. But this was really more like, this was a little bit more off the board kind of stuff. Like, I don't think there was a whole lot out there on him because he's playing at such a low level. So
yeah, your stat is taking shots at a dartboard this late in the draft for the most part.
He's a long play.
Sure, and the same goes for the last pick of the draft, 199th overall, Matteo Mann of the Chicoutimi Sanguines. I probably pronounced that wrong. It's a QMJHL team. And then Matteo Mann, again, is just kind of a long shot project type of deal. If he ever makes an impact on the NHL level, you consider yourself exceptionally lucky. If he turns into a decent AHLer, you're pretty happy with it.
Now, real quick, did you see his measurements?
I did not. Is he enormous or is he tiny?
No, he's I wrote this hulking defenseman, so I want you to take a guess who comes to mind when you hear that description.
Give me Sam Moran.
It's pretty much where you're going with this. He's 6'6", 230, by the way.
You mean development camp coach Sam Moran?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Development coach.
6'6", 229. We love to see that.
6'6",
That's a big old
230 is what I have written down.
18 years old. He might still be growing.
And for what it's worth, as I'm sure you can imagine, this big body defenseman hits hard, and now this is complete raw talent. There's, again, time play. You're going to be sitting on this for a while. may not even ever amount to anything, but you take chances that,
Listen,
the seventh round is the seventh round,
If a seventh round pick has the career that first round pick Sam Moran had, I'd be thrilled with it.
Yeah, you probably would. That's
frankly.
Yeah.
When does he try playing left wing? All right. That's kind of it for the draft. There wasn't a whole lot of movement outside that trade to get back into the second round.
That was it. That was the only trade he made all weekend or all week.
Before we head over to free agency, anything else from the draft or?
Not really specifically. No, I mean,
pretty boring first round.
Well, the first round was, I would say the first round
boring trade wise.
Boring
pick wise.
Yeah, because the picks were all over the place. I mean, there was a lot of some unexpected things, and you were getting like a really good example, by the way, was how far Oliver Moore fell into the late teens. He was slipping, and then the Flyers were coming.
Zach Benson sliding to 13,
which is a great pick for Buffalo, by the way.
Fantastic.
They're going to love him in Buffalo.
Yep.
Guys like that. I do want to bring it. Now, it's not often you talk about this pick, so I'm going to bring it up because it was a really cool story.
Is it going to be Carey Price forgetting David Reinbacher's name?
No, it's not that. Having
pulling a Bobby Clark?
No, because
I forgot.
Because this is a day 2 story. Actually, this is not a day 1 story. This is a day 2 story because you don't hear this a whole lot. Nobody talks. It's not the same thing as the NFL draft where the last guy taken is usually a huge story.
Irrelevant, yeah.
It's not normally as big of a story, but in this case, because the last guy taken was there and waited all the full 2 days to hear his name called.
And Columbus traded for the pick to make it happen. It's a great story. We love to see that.
No. And by the way, while we're at it, speaking of trades and things like that, also that were happening later in the draft and things like that, there was a lot of fanfare because the draft was in Nashville. There was a lot of fanfare around it being David Poyle's last draft and kind of his last duties, if you will, with Nashville in that role. So, there was a lot of that going on as well. I forgot to mention when Michkov got picked, Keith Jones got up and kind of made this joke about thanks for picking me, all that stuff like that. I know you made better ones than that. I think isn't that what he said? I know you made better picks than that, but
something like that.
He cracked a joke and like in typical Jonesy fashion, the broadcaster came through before handing it over to Danny Briere and saying,
Jonesy
"Go ahead,
being Jonesy.
Go ahead, make the pick."
Absolutely. All right,
but that's really where we leave this one. Let's go to free
absolutely. Agency. As we transition out of the draft into free agency, here's what we're going to do. I have a proposition for you.
Sure.
We're not going to talk about free agency around the league. We'll talk about what the Flyers did, but we're not going to talk about free agency around the league. And then on our next show in a week and a half, we'll play Who Plays Where.
That's fair enough anyway, because
I think that'll be fun.
Well, the list of people who still don't have contracts yet is still pretty formidable as well.
A ton. So essentially, the Flyers have made 3 signings here. They all kind of serve a similar role, and that role is, hey, leave our young kids alone. Ryan Poehling, Garnet Hathaway, Marc Staal.
Wasn't that a Pink Floyd song?
Something like that. All guys who are known for having a bit of a nasty streak on the ice. Hathaway and Poehling are, have some touch, have some talent. Staal is kind of on the back 9 at this point. He's kind of wearing it out. Again, we've talked about the fact that we're going to be backfilling this roster. We've expected Danny Briere to sign depth guys, bottom 6, bottom 4 on defense. This is what those are.
So this is kind of a fun topic for this because the timeline of all this is kind of interesting. So, as you would expect, and I'm not going to, like we said, we're not going to really talk about the other things that were happening, but free agency was its usual busyness in the first hour or so. You saw signings popping up and things like that, and the Flyers were not really doing as much in the beginning, right? As you would expect. It kind of funny, total opposites from last year where it was we were waiting to see if anything kind of was happening or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it was well, nothing's really happening. But it was we were expecting something to happen. This was, we're not expecting a whole lot to happen and nothing's really happening, which is perfect. It's not a big deal at all. And then the first one came through. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon, so about an hour and a half after free agency opened. And this is Ryan Poehling on a 1-year, $1.4 million deal. And I will just say what I said in the text group, because I think this is the perfect signing. It's the perfect thing to do, to take a 24-year-old who's looking for a chance and say, maybe you stick here, maybe you get some trade value. Who knows what the answer is? But there's a way for him to succeed potentially here and either maximize his value in a trade or maybe even stick around, because 24 is a really good age to be inserted in. Like you're right.
And he is an RFA.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, we thought backfill with maybe 29, 30-year-old type players who were looking for a spot to maybe move on and go play for a contender later.
Danny Briere is gem hunting on this one.
Right. This was, which is smart, to be honest. Like, you know what? The thought process behind free agency the night before kind of changed when a lot of the non-qualifying players kind of hit the waves a little bit, hit the Twitterverse. And
a lot of people went, whoa.
Right. Like,
there's a lot of people available.
Like, I saw a lot of people, and I ultimately, I'm trying to figure out he did get a contract. I'm gonna have to look it up just to see, because I don't want to mention tons of other players.
Yeah.
But I got asked a lot about. Okay, yeah. So it wasn't that bad. It was kind of same vein as what Poehling got. I got asked a lot of questions about, hey, Kyler Yamamoto got traded and he's being bought out. Would they look into it? And I just didn't know what kind of contract he was going to get. So you got to be and term for that matter. You had to be careful about both. Danny Briere is smart enough right now to know don't commit more than, say, 2 years. Well,
and players are being intelligent because they know we saw a ton of 1 and 2 year deals.
Yeah, the short-term play was big.
And so much of that has to do with betting on yourself, betting on the salary cap to go up, waiting until teams have a little bit more wiggle room, and cashing in when there's some space.
To be honest, when we get into the bigger picture of free agency next show, the handful of deals that go beyond the 1 or 2 year range kind of really were shockers for, like, as we were reacting to them. Like, we would sit there and go, "Wow, look at that deal."
Yeah, for good reasons and bad reasons.
Right. It was a big deal. It was a big deal to get anything more than that. I mean, even some of the massive signings that you're talking about, guys who were at the top of the free agent board. We're talking about that still took this play. But that's why I'm saying, like, that was I kind of went into that, like, leading up to Yamamoto fit the bill if you want to go there, but I think the problem with Yamamoto is that I think you expect higher out of him. Like, I think you can throw him potentially into your top 6, especially given the state of your team. And I don't know if they wanted to do that. I think Poehling, they can kind of change that up a little bit. So he kind of almost fits fourth line, to be honest.
Right. Well, here's the thing about these players is all these guys we're signing here in the short term, they're here to facilitate the long-term projects, the Joel Farabees and the players that we care about developing long-term. They will play wherever they need to play, right? The Philadelphia Flyers are not trying to put together an optimal lineup where every player is in the perfect position to maximize this, that, the other.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Put the guys you want to keep in a position to succeed, facilitate everything else around them, and then cut as much fat as you can at the trade deadline.
And it's a big learning curve for young guys, too. You're trying to get them into the right spots. So let's continue the timeline for a second, because this is where things kind of get fun and interesting for a second. Because normally on free agency day, and let's not forget it was also a holiday weekend, so I kind of had a cutoff point for my day on free agency day. And normally what I do is, okay, free agency opens at noon. I'm going to watch really closely at what's going on for about 3 hours, 3 to 4-ish, and then I'm kind of peeling out. And actually, I think I got kind of a little bit more of a release, because it was between 3 and 4. It was just shy of 3:30, I guess, that Danny Briere did a media availability and said, we don't expect any other signings today. We'll look over the next few days, but we don't expect anything else. And you go, okay. So I guess that's it. I get the rest of the day off, kind of thing. Like, because I'm just tracking Flyer signings. I don't have to do whatever. And literally not 30 minutes later, the Rhett Gardner signing came out. Now, I kind of didn't go crazy about that because it was a
pretty nothing signing.
Well, it was a 2-way contract. So you're going, okay, it's more of a Phantoms thing. That's fine or whatever. And it wasn't a big deal. Like I could even sit there and recognize this doesn't warrant a story by itself. It's like the footnote at the other part of the story, right? Like they signed Ryan Poehling and Rhett Gardner. Right.
And also Rhett Gardner, I guess.
Sure. And then all of a sudden it was like it's after 9 o'clock at night on free agency day, and that's when the Garnet Hathaway deal comes down.
Yep.
And it's like, Well, that's not.
And that's the biggest name they've signed all day in terms of like name recognition.
I would say it's the biggest name they signed the whole period so far.
I agree.
Probably. And of course, like now you're sitting there going, well, that's not nothing. That requires a story now, kind of, doesn't it? You know, like that's a bigger deal. So now anybody like, because real quick on Hathaway, because this is an easy one to kind of profile. Anybody who's watched the Flyers play the Washington Capitals over the years when he was on the team.
He's low rent Tom Wilson.
And he's annoying as hell when he's not on your team, and when he is, you're gonna love him. And I think the fans are gonna love him. He's not inept, you know, like in terms of scoring either. He can do a lot of other things too, like penalty killer.
My first thought when they signed him was F that guy, which means it's probably a great signing.
That's a fair way to look at it.
Because my first instinct was, oh, I hate him. Oh, wait, he's on my team now. Okay. It might be okay.
The thing is, and maybe it's me coming from a more objective place, I guess, right? Like to come from that place. When he got traded from Washington to Boston, I immediately went, well, gee, that guy feels like he should be a Boston Bruin, doesn't he? Like he fits the mold there too.
And you know what this deal is perfect for? This deal is perfect to be traded at the deadline to a playoff team who thinks they need a little bit of edge.
Sure. Now, I think there's a caveat on what you're saying, because I don't think it would be this year. I think it would be the last year of the contract. So I think you're going to ride it out So I think you're going to ride it out for a year. But nobody said you had to move it all in 1 year. You know, like the next 2 years are going to be like this. And realistically, let's be real about something. Hathaway can be an effective player.
He's playing in your top six. He's probably playing in your top six.
Nah, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
No, because I think they're just going to stick him to the role and let everybody, again, you're going to try to fill around him in terms of
but I could see him riding shotgun if you have Morgan Frost and Noah Cates, you know, in your top six, if he's your third winger on that line, or your third forward on that line.
Well, I'm trying to think for a second, because so insert Sean Couturier back into the lineup.
Allegedly.
You can say that, but
I'm not gonna believe it till he plays. And
sure,
even then I'll be wary.
Okay, but that's fair. I'm just saying if all goes according to plan in that respect, then insert Sean Couturier back in. You still have Travis Konechny. You still have Joel Farabee. You have Cates, Frost, Tippett. You have Cam Atkinson probably returning. Like all of a sudden, you start to realize that despite it probably not being a great team, like.
They're not going to be embarrassing. They're not going to be the 48-point Colorado Avalanche.
No, but all of a sudden, what I'm kind of getting at is that all of a sudden you start to realize how Ryan Poehling and Garnet Hathaway slide further and further down the line until all of a sudden you realize, guess where Ryan Poehling and Garnet Hathaway are playing? Next to Nick Delorier.
I was going to say the press box.
Well, or potentially that. I mean,
I assume Poehling's going to make your lineup most nights. Hathaway is probably going to be a little bit more of an in and out player.
No, see, I would say Hathaway's the guy who's going to be in regularly. Poehling, what I'm interested in with Poehling is how, because let's put it this way, John Tortorella loves him some Nick Delorier, right?
That's fair.
So John Tortorella is going to love him some Garnet Hathaway.
That's fair.
I don't know if John Tortorella is going to love him some Ryan Poehling when it comes down to it. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
I think this is going to be an earned thing. This is going to be like you would love to see with Ryan Poehling, and I'm not trying to compare, but you would love to see with Ryan Poehling Tortorella do what he did with Owen Tippett. And just say, look, I'm going to push, I'm going to demand,
we're going to make this work,
but we're going to find a way to bring the best out of you, and it's going to make you better, and you're going to be happier for it.
And for the record, Marc Staal is somewhere between Justin Braun and Keith Yandel.
Pretty much. I mean, do you know what's interesting about Marc Staal? He's so far...
a lot of things.
Oh, yes, I know. But he's so... 1,100 NHL games into his career. The ability is what it is. Like, he's not going to be anything more than on your third pairing if he's even in the lineup at all.
At best, yeah.
Right? But... this is the type of guy that teams
Can I trade him to the Rangers for a second-round pick at the deadline?
Hey, listen, I'm not sure, but you know what? I was about to get to. This is the type of player teams go crazy over at the deadline for playoff time. Like,
absolutely.
That they want on their roster, want in their room. Don't even care if he plays per se. Like they want him around for the emergency. Well, they want him around for the emergency too. That
Well, the experience that knows how to win. The
this
leadership,
guy can't play tonight. I need a guy who's got playoff experience to come in.
We're down 3-1 in a series, and we need to make a swap to get the boys going. You put Marc Staal in the lineup,
right? Like, and like, do you really think that they're going to have a problem trading 1 year, $1.1 million?
No,
not a chance. Like,
especially at the deadline when it's $300,000 if you're
which is why I buy what Danny Briere is totally saying about it. Like, it does almost make too much sense. Like, it's it's easy to move. It's so easy to move, and it's so easy to utilize while you're like right now. Think about what the rest of your blue line is at the moment. Like, once DeAngelo is gone, the rest of your blue line, like right now, you're filling out your blue line with Igor Zamula and Ronnie Attard. Is that what you want, though? Like
Ronnie Attard, who, by the way, just signed a new 2-year deal since we mentioned his name here on the podcast.
Yeah, two-year re-signing, and it's that 2-way, 1-way, so it's going to go.
It's a bridge.
It's it's fitting though. Like, you don't give him a lot of money for not having done a lot at the end. He's got 17 games at the NHL level between 2 years.
You give him 2
or
years,
19 or something like that. You know,
you give him 2 years where he's pretty likely to have a spot in the lineup. You figure out what he is, and then you sign him the next contract from there.
Oh, by the way, so speaking of Marc Staal for a second, because while we're on this whole thing, did you catch some of the New Jersey numbers?
I did not.
Okay, so for a day, Tyson Foerster was moving to number 18 before Marc Staal got signed and took it away from him again. So Tyson Foerster is going to the number he wore in the minor leagues, which was 71, which still is going to have kind of a cool look for him. Yeah. It's not 52 like it was for the tryout.
Fair.
But here's some fun ones, kind of, because these are ones that are probably more likely to be permanent. Noah Cates is going to 27.
Okay. Ooh, that's an interesting number.
That's an interesting number. Cam York is going to number 8.
I don't know how I feel about that one. Like, listen, here's the thing. I know Mark Recchi's not getting his jersey retired by the Flyers.
Right.
But, man, I guess.
Might want to put him in the Flyers Hall of Fame first before you worry about jersey retirement.
No, and I don't think he should. I'm firmly against him getting his number retired as a Flyer. But it's just still weird to see anybody else wear it. Okay,
I got you, and I understand where that's coming from.
I think Nicholas Grossman wore it for a while too, didn't he?
Nick Grossman.
Yeah, so it's been worn. It's
been worn by a lot of defensemen too, because that was Brad Marsh's number. You got Nick Grossman. You got Robert Haig.
Well, I was gonna say since
since Recchi. Yeah. Well, that's Robert Haig qualifies on that list as well. Actually, you know who wore it last? Believe it or not, Kevin Connaughton.
Oh God.
So just pointing it out there that it's a number that has been used by others.
And it's weird anytime anybody wears it.
Now, I will say this, because I don't know the numbers for some of the free agents yet.
Okay.
Some of them, their numbers are available. Like, Poehling was wearing 25. So 25 is available because James Van Riemsdyk is no longer a Flyer. I guess that's one we should bring up from free agency, is that he signed in Boston for a year. So there you go.
That's a fun one.
James Van Riemsdyk officially no longer a Flyer. So Poehling could wear number 25 if he wanted to. But Garnet Hathaway has always he's always worn 21. And I know that number's not available.
Nope. So, and Scott Lawton ain't giving it up. Not to this guy.
So I'm curious. I wonder if he would just reverse it and try to go to 12. I wonder if he would go to 20, because I think 20 is available. Like,
there's a lot of options.
There's just options, but it was just that's a thought for later. I mean, it's not a big deal. And then let's go to the last one, as you were about to mention, Victor Mete as well. Which is another really interesting. And see, I want to cross this between the two, because it's like the Rhett Gardner signing in a sense where it's a 2-way contract. It means it's not high commitment. He could be in the minor leagues. He could be in the NHL. There's not really anything to that.
I don't hate this signing.
No, because you don't hate it because it's in the Poehling vein. He's young. He's young and he wants a chance. And at this point, you might as well be willing to see where it goes, you know? Like,
so Danny Briere is playing NHL 23, and it's day 2 or 3 of free agency, and he goes and he sorts by potential and signs all the young, medium, elite guys.
or signs the guys who, like Marc Staal, are 36 that you're flipping for a mid-round pick.
Exactly.
Later, right?
Or the guy, he's 24 years old, but he's got high top 6 potential, so I'm going to throw him $1 million and,
Hey,
That's basically what happened here.
Hey, in fairness, because you brought this up before we started recording, because Mete, you're like, it feels like he's been around forever anymore, right? Like
25 years old.
Well, and he was, he was drafted in 2016 by Montreal, and he's kind of made the rounds. He's really made the rounds in Canada, by the way. Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto.
He is gonna love not paying 60% taxes.
But like, to go back to Poehling for a second, who was a former first-round pick, like, that's where you're coming from with this, like, seeing the potential top 6 potential kind of thing, like, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that means Poehling's got top 6.
Poehling was a player I liked in his draft year. Like,
yeah, I agree. I liked him in his draft year as well. And then, by the way, followed up all sorts of, going through the process of developing, played on some World Junior teams, and then makes his NHL debut and has a hat trick in his debut.
Yep. Something that I don't think people think about enough is how many guys' careers just got completely railroaded by COVID. Like Ryan Poehling was 20 or 21 when COVID really got fired up. Who knows what his development looks like if he's got 3 normal seasons under his belt?
It's also just crazy to think about guys like that, like he's 24 years old, and you got a guy who's sitting here saying, "I gotta like take a chance." You know what I mean? Like,
that's what I'm saying.
A bet on me year. He had, you're talking about a guy who so far has never been able to play. He literally makes his debut for one game in 2019, has the hat trick, and then comes back the next year, which is the year that eventually COVID hit. So he's not quite there yet. So he's probably he's between the minors and there. And I actually should pull up his elite prospect stats instead to see his minor league numbers, because his minor league numbers were probably better. Obviously, the year that we're talking about, he had 27 NHL games and only had a goal and an assist. So obviously, it wasn't quite the same thing. Okay, so in 36 in the AHL, he had 5 goals, 13 points, which isn't much better. It was kind of an interesting year for him.
And again, bit of a weird year.
Then the entire following year, he has basically a year off from the NHL, because that was the 56 game or where whatever. Now, solid AHL year, because in 28 games, he only played 28 games. He had 11 goals, 25 points.
Half the season that year, they played about 55.
Right. And then he really, he latched on more with Montreal the year after, 57 games, 9 goals, 17 points. And was near the same thing in the AHL. He played 7 games, was near point per game also, 3 goals, 6 points. But he's going to get buried a little bit. He's going to have to earn his way to get more to be able to be a higher-end player and be like one of those guys. But if you're playing him, if you find out that his best role, and remember something, he's a late first-round pick, so he's not a top 10
guy,
where you're looking for huge numbers. If he can be a fourth line, honestly, if they can construct him into a Scott Lawton type, that gives you 10 goals a year and 30 points, are you happy with that? I would be.
Absolutely. And I mean, he's produced at every level he's ever played, and I expect him to come in and figure it out. Sometimes even these American guys, it does, the guys who come through the NCAA and that whole system, it does take them a couple years to figure it out anyway.
Exactly.
And throw COVID in there, and throw this, that, the other, being stuck in Canada for an entire year. There's all sorts of stuff that could be going on with this kid, and it's one of those, there's zero risk on Danny Briere's part, and if you get a guy who's a guy, great, it's found money.
And that's the interesting part about everything, is that, going into free agency, the thing that I remember writing about and kind of talking about was, just don't give out anything crazy. Don't give out any crazy term here. The cap hit kind of
we didn't see any of it.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. Hathaway is probably, if he's going to kind of be stuck to your fourth line, it's probably a little more than you'd like to pay for your fourth line.
That's your air quotes worst contract you've signed, and it's still,
it's
like
not,
we talked about,
not even
super
close
movable.
No. Right, it's not even close to bad. It's no. It's right there. You'll be able to move that when the time comes. And that's again, that's kind of the good part, because to kind of tie it back full circle, the thing we were talking about in the Hayes trade, which is if you're going to have to eat one of these retention spots, I still after free agency, you know what your retention play is for the rest of the year if you have one slot left? It's still Sean Walker.
Yep. After
all that, it's still Sean Walker. So you could do worse,
Absolutely. And honestly, I think you could do worse is, I think, a great summary for how this all went, how the free agency period went, how the draft went. I think Danny Briere did a great job. He took some big swings. Obviously, we have to see if those become swings and misses or not. But either way, I'm very excited to see where we go from here. And where we go from here is we go on with our evening, because we have come to the end of the show here. If you'd like to kind of figure out where we're at, follow Kevin on Instagram. That's what I'm going to start with here, because that is the most stable platform at the moment.
That's fair.
And it's at Kevin_Durso. If you pay for Twitter, you can follow us at YWT Podcast 6,000 times a day. Or you can follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Yeah, and other than that, you can find us everywhere you find your podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. We're on sportstalkphilly.com. You know where to find your podcast by now. And you know what? I think that is going to do it for us today. We will not be back this weekend. We will probably be back the weekend after that, the 16th or so. We will talk about that off the air, and we'll be back at some point. We're in the summer now, and there's really not a whole lot going on. It might be a little bit till our next show, but we'll be back eventually, and when we are, we'll see ya.